right, joined now by Dane Moore of the Dane Moore NBA podcast, covering the Minnesota Timberwolves for us here at the Alley Oop. Thank you so much for joining me now, Dane. This has been an incredible run so far for the Minnesota Timberwolves. Just what stands out so far for a team that's now 17-5 somehow?
Yeah, just that it's like way easier. It's like way easier to cover. I mean, you've experienced that, right, with Denver,
Yeah.
where it kind of shifts from your like more futuristic thinking in like of okay, what is here on this team that will be on the next version of the really good version of this team. You know, that's been so much of my career covering the Timberwolves is what here can sustain and grow. And now it's shifting into this, what do they have now, right? And how good can this be now? What can get marginally better now? What has potential for regression? And it's a fun, different sort of task, I think, in covering the team or for the fans who are watching the team. As, again, I'm sure you guys kind of experienced with Denver when the goal or the objective kind of evolves based on the quality of the team.
Yeah, and you start to see it pretty early, right? Where you get into this portion of the season, and a lot of it is about familiarizing yourself with what the group is going to be like. And because we talked about the expectations for this group as, hey, they could upset somebody in the first round. They could make a playoff series. Like they could win a playoff series. They could be a playoff team, things like that. We're now past that. Like that conversation, it seems, at least at this stage, is kind of over. Like I know that the West has been a little bit down initially, but the T-Wolves have earned their spot at the top of the West so far. 4th best point differential, 16th on offense, but first by a long margin on defense in a lot of ways. Is this like just a little bit more of what you expected from the group, or like just a little bit better? Or where are some of the areas that you think you like hit on with this group, and where are some of them you think that you missed on your initial evaluation?
Yeah, I think where I missed on the evaluation ones is probably the more interesting, right? Because it's what's happened that we didn't expect. And the main thing there is the defense being elite, and the impact Rudy directly has on that. It's an interesting experience covering Rudy and watching him every single day in comparison to, what we do when we watch other teams that we don't directly cover, where you're seeing him here and there, right? You may be catching 10 games over the course of the season or something like that. And to appreciate Rudy Gobert is to watch him every day and understand what he does consistently and how he changes the ways in which an opponent wants to play against you. The frequency of the shots just not even being attempted by opponents at the rim has really popped this year. That's a major difference from last season when Rudy didn't have that same level of rim deterrence. And just seeing that day to day and understanding that that level of defense even exists for him or for this team, it totally changes your perspective on a team that is, like you said, 16th in offense. They're a mediocre offensive team that probably can get a little bit better than that.
Sure.
But I don't think this is, ever going to be a top 7, 8 offensive team. They kind of need this defense, I feel like, to be able to navigate some of their offensive shortcomings or some of the asymmetries in their roster construction that hold back the offense a little bit. So I miss the defense and specifically what Rudy could do in that and how others around him are really empowering him or just they're selling out on the perimeter, man. And it's hectic and difficult to get clean shots off against this team, not just at the rim, but on the perimeter too, because they're just like, dial it up and run these guys off the line, rear view contest, whatever, send them to Rudy. And they very much bought into that. And the pursuit of when they're playing defense is really pretty incredible because it forces the other team to take difficult shots, scramble a little bit offensively, only with the end result of getting to the rim where Rudy is for 35 minutes a night. It's fun to cover a really good defensive team because you're watching these things and you're seeing them night and night sustain. It's been fun, but I definitely missed that. Maybe I shouldn't have. They were 8th in defense last year. We probably should have assumed maybe it was going to get a little bit better, but I don't know. Number one, I wasn't expecting that.
There is a level of, I guess, seriousness that comes with that, where you saw the team get a taste of it last year, and what really kind of changes when you get the first taste of that action, and you want to improve upon it. You see what you've did well, but then you can see those little margins that you can improve, and it just feels like they've tightened up on a lot of those margins. Anthony Edwards has become a better defender. Karl-Anthony Towns has become a better defender. Mike Conley is in there more consistently than a D'Angelo Russell was for half of the year last year, and you could start to see the impact, even though Mike isn't like an elite defender anymore. He's still somebody who's functional within that. And then like the Jaden McDaniels is like, he's been out for a little bit here, but Nickeil Alexander-Walker's awesome. Kyle Anderson is smart. Naz Reid is awesome. Like these guys are just really, really great pieces. And I mean, it all surrounds what I think is the defensive player of the year. And that's a completely understandable take at this point, where you've got a team that's number one in defense, and he is a proof of concept on how that works. You mentioned him being like seeing that from afar and not necessarily seeing it up close all the time. Like we saw it. We're in the same division as the Utah Jazz for 8, 9, 10 years that he was over there. And now you see him up close, and I can understand how the perspective can change. But like, I mean, Denver, not super.
Last year was bad. Last year he wasn't doing this. Like that's what it is too. So it's like you didn't live the Utah experience day to day, and you weren't seeing it day to day. And then he comes here, and it's just good, you know. So you didn't even understand what the ceiling. I would have needed to have been watching Utah, you know, the majority of their games in 2021 or whatever, to have been able to be like, oh yeah, this maybe can be copy and pasted onto it. I would have been skeptical that it could have been, you know, he's in his 30s now, that even could exist, but it can exist. It is happening. It's happened for the first quarter of the season, where he's been legitimately great in probably 18, 19 of the 22 games. And that's an interesting thing too, where it's like, how many, even the best offensive players, right, in the league, how many games are they great offensively for? It's not 90% of the games. And that's a unique thing to Rudy. You know what I'm saying? Like, you can be great defensively 90% of the games if you're a great defensive player. I don't know, like, what percentage of the games can you be great if you're the best offensive player in the league? 80? 75? There's a difference there. And I'm growing in appreciation for that and the consistency of Rudy too. And so, yeah, like, I don't know who, like, is it Anthony Davis? Who are the other cases for Defensive Player of the Year right now?
Oh, I don't even have any. Like, I think that it's Rudy at this point, and he has raised the floor to such a level for this team for where it was last year, where things were not in a great place, whether it was, and a lot of that had to do with the offense for sure, but it just does feel like he has provided some stability for the group in a lot of different ways. And like, there's very few players in the NBA that can even compare to that. So he gets a ton of credit from me.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
I'm curious. I'm just thinking about this right now, and I think Denver experienced the other side of this for the past 3-4 years or whatever. Like you said, Wolves are average, slightly below average offensive team, and so are the Orlando Magic and the Houston Rockets, and they're the second and third best defensive teams in the league right now. And I'm starting to think about this, you know, dichotomy, right, of being elite on one side of the floor and average on the other, and trying to be able to make that work to be one of the very best teams in the league. Like, average and number one is good, but I think in Minnesota we've now started shifting our perspective into, can this be a good team, into now, can it be a great team? And I think the question is, can you be average on one side of the ball and elite on the other and still be a great team? Denver's a good example of that in the inverse in recent seasons. How did you approach that at the time? And were you skeptical? Did you believe the elite offense could carry them through? And are those even apples to apples comparisons?
No,
with one being offense versus defense. You know what I'm saying?
Of course. No, I think it's a very fair comparison, if only the inverse of it. And like, from Denver's perspective, there were there were a couple of indicators that they could be a strong defensive team when they wanted to be. But playing defense throughout the regular season is hard. And it's why I have respect for teams like Minnesota and Houston and Orlando and teams like that that have made that their identity and turned it into something special. I think on the offensive end, again, and maybe this is for Minnesota, they have to be able to solve problems on the offensive end. And when defense, when defenses kind of figure out how to funnel Anthony Edwards into their help, how to help off of Rudy Gobert in ways where he doesn't just get lobs at the rim, where if they're getting up and getting physical into Karl-Anthony Towns with a guy that can guard him like an Aaron Gordon briefly last year in the playoffs. So there are things that Minnesota, I think, is still going to have to answer on the offensive end, much in the way that Denver had to answer on the defensive end. How do you keep Jokic out of the pick and roll and out of space a lot of the time? How do you make those passes more difficult around him? What are the ways that you can force tougher shots rather than just give up the easy ones? Denver had to go through all those steps last year. And when they were in the clutch specifically, they were really good defensively. And I don't, it's such a small sample size.
On the offensive side, I mean, again, in 22 games or whatever, it's kind of been that too, which maybe gives you a little more belief in the offense. Like, if you're overall an average offensive team, but in the clutch, you can be relied upon to be a top 10, top 5 offensive team. I haven't looked it up recently, but when I did, a week ago, they were there. I think the Wolves could get that because in the clutch, Anthony Edwards is going to be on the floor. And they are going to function at that level broadly when Anthony Edwards is on the floor. And this is just because it's most recently on my mind, Ant didn't play when the Wolves played the Pelicans on Monday in their last game before recording this, and it was no Ant for 48 minutes, and now it's 48 minutes of Wolves offense with no Anthony Edwards, and that is what I think is contributing to this mediocrity of the offense as a whole. And no, it's only on average maybe 15 minutes a night. Again, this is kind of similar to the Jokic thing, right? Where it's can you survive offensively when your offensive fulcrum is off the floor? And I think people look at the Wolves and they go, you got Cat, right? Play through him. He's an elite offensive player. The problem, again, that we saw in the Pelicans game was they did the Aaron Gordon thing. They guarded Cat with Herb Jones, and they brought doubles. And that has been, for a while now, difficult for Karl to solve. Not even just because of... Initially, he had to get comfortable with that, and he's still getting comfortable with it. But the issue in that game was they're bringing those doubles. Karl's passing out of them, but to who? There isn't shooting around. They're playing a lot of lineups with 2-3 non-shooters out there. They're playing sometimes Kyle Anderson, Shake Milton, and Rudy Gobert all on the floor. If that's out there, Karl's getting doubled in the post. What are you really going to find?
Right.
And so I'm a little at the moment a little hyper fixated on broadly. This team is mediocre offensively, and that is a product of when Anthony Edwards isn't on the floor. I think they need to find improvements there to be able to overall improve the offense, but also in the playoffs, 10, 12 minutes a night, you're going to need to live without Anthony Edwards too. And
that's what I was going to say, though, is the good thing about the playoffs is that 15 minutes a night that you're supposed to survive without. I mean, it kind of just turns to 6 to 10 in a lot of ways. And there are Jokic, and one of the things that people struggle to appreciate about him is that he can play 40 minutes a night in the playoffs, no issue. That is, and his 40th minute is going to be 90% as good as his first minute, and that's a pretty strongly conditioned athlete. And I think Anthony Edwards, we talked about this a little bit about last year, didn't approach the conditioning as well at the beginning, seems to have taken that very seriously, and seems to be in a really good place where, hey, the heavy burden, the heavy minutes toll that's going to happen in the playoffs, he seems like he's ready for that and that he's graduated to that. So I tend to think
playoffs, I don't know, night to night in the regular season, we'll see.
Sure.
It's also the factor of how much defensive responsibility does Ant have when we're talking about that 40-minute. I'm thinking about difficult opponents right now in the playoffs. I'm okay, Phoenix. So you want to play Ant for 40 minutes in that game, but he's guarding in those 40 minutes one of probably Beal, Durant, or Booker,
Right.
And that becomes a tenuous defensive responsibility with a lot of, offensive legwork to do there as well. I'm nitpicking at a 17-5 team, but maybe this is indicative of where I'm at in my head with it. Is like, I've graduated from, like, I think I said with you when we were doing predictions at the beginning of the season, like 5th seed, 47 wins. Like I'm above that, and I'm testing night to night, like, the feasibility of my belief that this is a 2nd seed, 1st seed, maybe low to mid 50 wins team, And these are the questions, the nitpicks that they have to answer to clear that bar, at least in my mind.
No, it's a fair step in the right direction for this group. And how fun is that you get to be able to even entertain that as a possibility? And like, I think that Minnesota's in a really good place, and it is very cool to see them be able to handle that. Just really quickly, we'll wrap up with the schedule here. The schedule has been kind to Minnesota at the initial outset. That you and I were talking briefly. This next run that they're about to go on, these next 16 games or so, are going to be difficult. Just what are you looking for in that stretch? What are you looking for from this group, kind of improving their salt?
I'm interested to see how they bounce back, right? Like you said, starting with the Pelicans game on Monday, they have 16 straight games against teams that are currently 500 or better. 11 of those 16 games are on the road. And in that, at some point, they're probably going to lose 2 or 3 or 4 games in a row. They haven't done that this year. They haven't lost consecutive games even this year. And that's an interesting test, I think, for a team that's already tasted success, right? What happens when that gets taken away? What is your ability to bounce back and restabilize off of that? And they're missing Ant in the Pelicans game, but who knows? Maybe these next few games they lose. Maybe they go like 1-4 in the next 5 games. Okay, whatever. You're still 18-8 or whatever, and really you're in a great spot. But can you internalize that mentally and get back and go in the next 5 games and win 3 or 4 or 5 of them? I'm very curious to see that with this group. Also, because the group's getting back to full strength. You mentioned Jaden being out. What can he give this team? They've been the number 1 defense, and Jaden McDaniels has played like a third of the minutes this season.
Wild.
And he's the 2nd best defensive player on the team, one of the best perimeter defenders in the entire NBA. So there's actually reason to believe they could be playing at a higher overall level over this next stretch of games, more difficult opponents. But that's what this team needs right now. I feel that they kind of, just because they won 16 of 18 games, that you hit some of that natural coasting vibe. What happens when you get punched, when you're coasting? Do you get back up and be able to do that? And with a team that has not had a lot of regular season or sustained success, that's at least somewhat of a question. I believe so much more in the continuity and confidence and camaraderie of this group that I believe in their ability to, one, probably not let a 3 or 4 game losing streak happen. But even if it does, because they're in a different place, Rudy in particular is in such a different place mentally, it seems. I struggle to picture this team sustaining an extended poor stretch, and that's, I think that's a testament to Chris Finch and getting this group to enable that identity, right? That's not just defense, but professional. And they're just a team that they're not going to rest guys, man. They're going to, it's why they're a good, I don't know if you can live bet season win total over unders. I'd take the Wolves over because they're not going to rest guys. They're going to go here. This team is all in on this year. We've talked about it before. Whole bunch of tax and roster sort of things. I know they were the 8th seed last year and got bounced by the Nuggets, but this is a team who views themselves as many levels above that, and should. They should.
Yeah,
Agreed. The circumstances indicate that Rudy is still at his peak, but won't be forever. The roster's going to change in the future, probably have to. So let's go now. And I'm really impressed by that. Feels like the ethos of this group. So let's see what happens in this difficult stretch.
we will see what happens with them. I'm looking forward to seeing how they respond to this tougher stretch. But he's Dane Moore of the Dane Moore NBA podcast. Thank you so much, Dane, for hopping on. Really appreciate you taking the time. Let's talk in 6 weeks, all right?
Yes, sir, man. Thank you.